blood soaked through the pristine white snow on the steps of her porch. Chloe, a heavy-set single mother, just trying to keep her son fed, didn't expect to find the most feared man in Boston bleeding out at her feet. She had two choices: lock the door and let him die, or drag his massive frame inside and risk everything. Saving a monster always comes with a massive price. Tonight, that price was her quiet, completely invisible life. The danger had only just begun. Bitter winds howled through the narrow streets of South Boston, rattling the thin window panes of Chloe Henderson's rundown duplex. It was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and the neighborhood was swallowed by a freezing, unforgiving blizzard. Inside, the cramped living room was barely warm, the old radiator clanking rhythmically in the corner. Chloe sat at the scarred wooden kitchen table, rubbing her tired eyes. She was a fat woman in her early 30s, her soft, thick curves wrapped in an oversized, faded grey fleece sweater that had seen better days. Her heavy thighs rested against the edge of the chair as she meticulously counted out the crinkled dollar bills and loose change she had earned from her double shift as a veterinary technician at Dr. Aris's clinic. It was barely enough to cover the heating bill, let alone the new winter boots her 5-year-old son, Finn, desperately needed. Finn was fast asleep in the tiny adjacent bedroom, bundled under 3 layers of quilts. He was the center of Chloe's universe, the sole reason she endured the grueling hours, the aching joints from carrying her heavy frame on her feet all day, and the constant suffocating anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck. Chloe let out a deep, weary sigh, her plump fingers pushing back a stray lock of messy brown hair from her forehead. She stood up, her weight shifting, as she moved toward the small kitchenette to pour herself a cup of cheap instant coffee. Then a heavy, wet thud echoed from the front porch. Chloe froze. The coffee mug slipped from her grasp, shattering on the cheap linoleum floor, splashing dark liquid across her sneakers. She held her breath, listening over the howling wind. A low, agonizing groan vibrated through the thin wooden door. Her maternal instincts screamed at her to lock the deadbolt, check on Finn, and call the police. But this was South Boston. The police either took an hour to arrive or brought more trouble than they solved. Swallowing her fear, Chloe grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. She tiptoed to the door, peering through the frosted peephole. A massive, dark shape lay crumpled against her welcome mat. He wasn't moving. Hesitantly, she undid the locks and cracked the door open. The freezing air bit into her exposed skin, but the cold was immediately forgotten. A man was sprawled across her porch, clutching his side. He was dressed in a bespoke, charcoal grey tailored suit that was now ruined, saturated with a terrifying amount of dark crimson blood. His face was turned away, hidden by the shadows, but his sheer size was intimidating. "Hey," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Mister, you can't be here." The man shifted, his head rolling back to reveal sharp, aristocratic features, bruised and battered. His jawline clenched in pure agony. He opened his eyes, piercing, icy blue eyes that locked onto his with the intensity of a dying predator. "Help," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. "No cops." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the golden rule of her neighborhood: you don't get involved. But as she watched the blood pooling on the white snow, spreading like a gruesome halo around him. Her conscience betrayed her fear. He was dying. She couldn't let a man bleed to death, feet away from where her little boy slept. Damn it, she muttered under her breath. Dropping the skillet, she stepped out into the biting cold. You have to help me, okay? I can't lift you alone. Chloe bent down, wrapping her thick, sturdy arms under his broad shoulders. She was a large woman, accustomed to physically hauling heavy bags of dog food and restraining massive mastiffs at the clinic. Using her low center of gravity and every ounce of strength in her heavy frame, she hoisted his upper body. He groaned, a horrific sound of torn muscle and bone, but managed to push off the ground with one leg. Together, in a clumsy, desperate dance, they stumbled through the doorway. She kicked the door shut, locking it securely before dragging him onto the faded living room rug. He collapsed completely, unconscious. Panic threatened to consume her, but the clinical side of her brain took over. She ran to the bathroom, grabbing her emergency medical kit. A stolen collection of sutures, heavy-duty bandages, antibiotics, and surgical tools from the vet clinic. She knelt beside the stranger, her knees sinking into the carpet, ripping open his ruined suit jacket and the blood-soaked silk shirt beneath. She exposed a torso covered in old, faded scars. But her focus was on the fresh, weeping bullet wound just below his ribs. It was a clean, through-and-through shot, missing his vital organs but nicking a vein. Blood was pumping out rapidly. Okay, buddy. You're going to hate this, Chloe whispered to the unconscious man. She poured a generous amount of rubbing alcohol directly into the wound. His body violently jerked, a guttural roar ripping from his throat even in his unconscious state. Chloe placed her heavy knee gently but firmly against his hip to pin him down, using her weight to keep him from thrashing. With practiced, steady hands, she packed the entry and exit wounds with gauze, applying immense pressure until the bleeding finally slowed. For the next 2 hours, she worked tirelessly. She sutured the torn flesh, her plump fingers moving with surprising dexterity, tying off the stitches exactly as she had done on countless injured animals. She bandaged his torso tightly, administered a strong dose of broad-spectrum veterinary antibiotics she prayed would work on a human, and covered his shivering, shock-ridden body with her thickest fleece blanket. When it was finally over, Chloe collapsed back against the sofa, her hands stained red, her chest heaving. She stared at the man. His breathing had leveled out, a steady rise and fall beneath the blanket. She had no idea who he was, but the expensive Italian leather shoes, the custom suit, and the bullet hole told a story she didn't want to hear. She had just brought a very dangerous world straight into her living room. Sunlight filtered through the cheap plastic blinds, casting harsh, striped shadows across the living room floor. Chloe hadn't slept a wink. She sat rigidly in the armchair opposite the stranger, a steaming mug of tea in her hands, her eyes fixed on his pale but calm face. She had already checked on Finn, making sure her son was still deeply asleep before returning to her vigil. Suddenly, the man's fingers twitched. His icy blue eyes snapped open, completely lucid, devoid of the grogginess most people experienced after massive trauma. In a fraction of a second, his hand shot to his hip, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. Realizing his holster was gone, he bolted upright, a sharp hiss escaping his lips as the movement pulled at Chloe's neat sutures. "Don't move," Chloe ordered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the rapid fluttering in her chest. She remained seated, her wide, soft figure unmoving in the chair, the oversized sweater hiding her nervous posture. The man froze, his gaze locking onto her. He took in the cramped, shabby room, the blood-stained towels shoved into a plastic trash bag, and finally, the fat woman sitting calmly across from him. He was Matteo Romano, the undisputed, ruthless head of the Romano crime syndicate. Men bowed to him. Women starved themselves to fit his aesthetic perfection. Yet here was a heavy-set woman in cheap clothes, staring him down without an ounce of deference. "Where am I?" Matteo demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the tiny room. "South Boston, my living room," Chloe replied, taking a slow sip of her tea. "You bled out on my porch. I patched you up. You're lucky it was a clean exit wound, or you'd be sitting in the morgue right now instead of on my rug." Matteo looked down at his torso, lifting the blanket to inspect the bandages. The work was professional, tight, and clean. "You a doctor?" "Vet tech," she corrected, a dry, humorless smile touching her lips. "So technically I treat animals." Seemed fitting. A flash of genuine surprise, followed by a dark amusement, crossed Matteo's face. He analyzed her carefully. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't hysterical. She was entirely unimpressed by the lethal aura he deliberately projected. "You know who I am?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "I know you're a guy who gets shot at and wears suits that cost more than my car," Chloe said, standing up. Her thick thighs brushed against the coffee table as she moved toward the kitchen. "I don't know your name, and frankly I don't want to. Once you can stand, you're leaving." "Matteo?" He quietly, surprising himself. He never gave his name to civilians. "My name is Matteo. Well, Matteo, I'm Chloe. And you three sharp, authoritative knocks hammered against the front door." Chloe froze, her blood running cold. Matteo's demeanor shifted instantly from guarded to lethal. He ignored the excruciating pain in his side and forced himself to his feet, silently stepping into the shadowy hallway leading to the bedrooms. "Open up. Boston PD. We're doing a neighborhood sweep." A loud, aggressive voice yelled from the porch. Matteo met Chloe's terrified gaze. "It's a hit squad," he whispered, his eyes dark with murderous intent. "They own the local precinct. If they see me, they kill us both, and anyone else in the house." Chloe's heart stopped. Thin adrenaline, hotter and faster than anything she had ever felt, surged through her heavy frame. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Matteo by his uninjured arm and shoved him roughly toward the cramped hallway closet, burying him behind the heavy winter coats and the vacuum cleaner. "Don't make a sound," she hissed. She turned, swiftly kicking the plastic bag of bloody towels under the sofa, and smoothed down her oversized sweater. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate down, and walked to the door. She unbolted it, opening it just a crack, keeping the heavy chain engaged. Standing on her porch was Officer Riley, a notoriously corrupt cop who patrolled their sector. He wasn't alone. Two other large, heavily armed men in plain clothes stood behind him, their eyes scanning her dark windows. "Officer Riley," Chloe said, projecting a groggy, irritated tone, rubbing her eyes as if she had just woken up. "It's barely morning. What's going on?" Riley looked her up and down, a flicker of disdain crossing his features as he took in her messy hair and plump figure. "We're tracking a suspect, Chloe." "Dangerous guy. Fled a shootout a few blocks from here. You see anything unusual last night?" "Other than the blizzard?" Chloe scoffed, wrapping her thick arms around her chest. "I worked a double shift at the clinic, got home, locked the doors and passed out. If some criminal was freezing his butt off out there, I sure didn't see him." "Meh." Riley leaned closer to the crack in the door, trying to look past her large frame. "You mind if we take a quick look inside? Just for your safety." Chloe narrowed her eyes, stepping directly into his line of sight, using her broad shoulders to block the view completely. "Actually, Riley, I do mind. My 5-year-old is asleep in there, and I'm not having a bunch of armed men tracking dirty snow onto my carpets and waking him up without a warrant." Riley's jaw tightened. He placed a heavy, leather-gloved hand against the doorframe, leaning in. "This guy is a killer, Chloe. If he's in there—" "If he was in here, I'd be dead, wouldn't I?" Chloe snapped back, her voice rising in protective, motherly fury. "Now, unless you have a piece of paper from a judge, back off my porch. I have to get my kid ready for school." For a tense, agonizing moment, Riley stared her down. Chloe held her ground, her heart hammering violently, praying the lingering scent of rubbing alcohol wasn't noticeable. Finally, Riley sneered, pulling his hand back. "Fine. But if you see anyone in a bloody suit, you call us immediately. Don't be stupid." "Have a good morning, officer," Chloe said sharply, slamming the door shut and engaging the deadbolt. She leaned her heavy back against the solid wood, her legs suddenly turning to jelly. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her plump hands, taking ragged, shaky breaths. The closet door creaked open. Matteo stepped out, his hand clutching his bleeding side, his icy eyes fixed on her with an entirely new expression. It wasn't just assessment anymore. It was profound respect. He walked over slowly, standing over her huddled, trembling form. "You belong by my side," the Ruthless Mafia boss whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, absolute certainty. "You just saved my life, Chloe, and I repay my debts." Chloe pushed herself up from the floor, her heavy breathing echoing in the narrow hallway. She brushed off her faded fleece sweater, her soft, round face flushed with a mixture of terror and absolute indignation. "I don't belong by anyone's side, especially not yours," she hissed, keeping her voice incredibly low, so as not to wake her son. "You need to get out of my house before those crooked cops come back and kill us all." Matteo leaned heavily against the cheap floral wallpaper, his breathing shallow. The stitches she had hastily sewn into his side were holding, but he was still losing blood. His usually tanned face a sickening shade of grey. Despite his physical weakness, his icy blue eyes remained razor-sharp, calculating every inch of her small, cluttered home. He noted the worn-out carpet, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, and the fierce, uncompromising fire in the eyes of the fat, beautiful woman standing before him. She was entirely out of her depth, Yet she had looked a heavily armed, corrupt police officer in the eye, and lied without a single stutter. "If I walk out that door right now, I am a dead man," Matteo stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "And if they catch me outside your house, they will come back inside to tie up loose ends. You lied to Riley. He knows you lied. He just didn't have the warrant or the backup to force his way past you." Chloe's stomach dropped, a cold dread washing over her thick frame. She crossed her plump arms over her chest, digging her fingernails into her sleeves. "So what? You just stay here." "In my living room? I have a child, Matteo. I can't have a mob war breaking out next to his toy box." "I need a phone," Matteo demanded, ignoring her panic. "Not a smart device. Something untraceable. A prepaid burner." Chloe hesitated, biting her bottom lip. She walked over to the kitchen drawer, her heavy thighs brushing against the counter, and pulled out an old, chunky, prepaid cell phone she kept for emergencies. She tossed it onto the sofa. 2 minutes. Then we figure out how to get you out of here. Before Matteo could reach for the device, the soft creak of a door hinge shattered the tense silence in the room. "Mommy?" Chloe spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Finn stood in the doorway of his small bedroom, clutching his worn-out stuffed bear. He was dressed in oversized superhero pajamas, his messy brown hair sticking up in every direction, his sleepy eyes rubbed frantically before settling on the massive, bleeding stranger standing in their hallway. Instinctively, Chloe moved, placing her wide, sturdy body entirely between her son and the Ruthless Mafia boss. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice instantly dropping its sharp edge, replacing it with a forced, soothing warmth. "Why are you out of bed?" "It's still early." "I heard voices," Finn mumbled, peeking around his mother's thick hip to stare at Matteo. "Are you a giant?" Matteo froze. He was a man accustomed to instilling pure, unadulterated terror in the hearts of hardened criminals. He had broken bones and ruined lives without a second thought. But staring down at the small, innocent boy, rubbing his eyes, something entirely unfamiliar shifted inside his chest. He slowly lowered himself to the floor, wincing as his side screamed in agony until he was at eye level with the child. "I am a giant," Matteo whispered, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But I got fighting a dragon. Your mum is a very brave doctor who fixed me up." Chloe stared at the ruthless crime lord in absolute shock. The lethal, terrifying aura he carried had vanished completely, replaced by a calm, steady presence that actually made Finn smile. "My mum fixes everything," Finn declared proudly, gripping his bear tighter. "Even stray dogs." "Go back to sleep, Finn," Chloe interrupted, gently steering her son back into his room and tucking him into the heavy quilts. "The giant needs to make a phone call and then go home." When she returned to the living room, Matteo was already dialing a number on the cheap plastic phone. He held it to his ear, his expression hardening back into the merciless boss of the Romano syndicate. "It's me," he barked into the receiver. "I need an extraction. South Boston. Send Griffin." "No, tell no one else. We have a mole, and the local precinct is on the Donovan family's payroll. Just get here." He snapped the phone shut and looked up at Chloe. "My men are coming. We will be gone in 20 minutes. "Good," Chloe replied, moving to the sink to wash the dried blood off her plump hands. The water ran pink down the drain, a horrifying reminder of the night's events. "You need to pack a bag," Matteo said quietly. Chloe turned off the faucet, freezing in place. "Excuse me? You and the boy?" "You have to come with me," Matteo stated, pushing himself up from the sofa. "Riley is a Donovan dog. The Donovans ordered this hit. They knew exactly where my car would be, and exactly who was riding with me. If they know I survived, they will tear this neighborhood apart looking for me. When they realize you helped me, they won't just kill you, Chloe. They will hurt the boy first, just to make you watch." "No." Chloe breathed, stepping backward, her heavy frame hitting the edge of the kitchen counter. "No. You said you were leaving. We aren't a part of this. We are nobodies. You made yourself a somebody the second you dragged my bleeding body into your home," Matteo said, closing the distance between them. He stopped just inches from her, his sheer size towering over her round figure. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently hovering over her trembling shoulder without touching it. "I swear on my life, I will not let a single soul harm you or your son. But you cannot stay here. If you stay, you die." Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She looked around her tiny, freezing duplex. It was a dump, but it was their home. She had fought tooth and nail for this miserable little life. And in one night, this bleeding man in a bespoke suit had burned it all to the ground. 20 minutes. Chloe choked out, pushing past him to grab a duffel bag from the closet. Headlights cut through the blinding snowstorm, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the frosted windows of the heavily armored SUV. Chloe sat rigidly in the spacious back seat, her thick thighs pressed tightly together, her arms wrapped protectively around Finn, who had thankfully fallen back asleep against her soft, warm chest. She stared out at the dark, winding roads, watching the familiar, gritty streets of South Boston fade into the distance, replaced by towering pines and empty, desolate highways. In the front passenger seat, Matteo sat in stony silence, pressing a fresh square of gauze against his side. The driver, a mountain of a man, introduced only as Griffin, navigated the treacherous, icy roads with terrifying precision. Griffin had arrived exactly 19 minutes after Matteo's call, completely armed and flanked by 2 other black SUVs that were currently trailing them like mechanical shadows. "How much further?" Chloe asked, the silence in the vehicle gnawing at her frayed nerves. 10 minutes, Griffin replied gruffly, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of the heavy-set woman sitting in the back. He had been with Matteo for 15 years and had never seen his boss allow a civilian into his inner circle, let alone a disorganized, exhausted mother in cheap clothes. Yet Matteo had threatened to strip the flesh from anyone who looked at her sideways. "We are crossing into New Hampshire," Matteo added, not turning his head, but his voice was aimed solely at Chloe. "I have a secure compound in the mountains. It is completely off the grid. The Donovans don't know it exists. You and Finn will be perfectly safe there." Safe is a relative term when you're traveling with the mob. Chloe muttered under her breath, her plump fingers stroking Finn's messy hair. Matteo let out a low, breathy chuckle that ended in a sharp wince. You have a sharp tongue, Chloe. I like it. Most people tremble when they speak to me. I deal with aggressive Rottweilers on a daily basis. Chloe fired back, her maternal defensiveness flaring. You're just a man who bleeds like everyone else. I saw the inside of your abdomen, remember? The heavy steel gates of the compound loomed out of the blizzard like a medieval fortress. Towering concrete walls, topped with subtle but lethal electrified fencing, surrounded a massive modern architectural marvel made of dark wood, glass, and stone. Armed guards in tactical winter gear immediately stepped out of the shadows, recognizing Griffin's vehicle and waving them through the heavy security checkpoint as the SU-5 pulled into the expansive heated underground garage. Chloe felt a profound sense of isolation. She was entirely cut off from the real world. Griffin opened the door for them. Chloe hoisted Finn into her arms. At 50 pounds, he was heavy, but her sturdy, broad frame easily accommodated his weight. She followed Matteo into a private elevator that shot them up into the main living quarters. The penthouse was staggering. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the snow-covered valley. The floors were heated dark oak, and the furniture looked like it cost more than Chloe would make in 3 lifetimes. But there was no time to admire the luxury. An older man, carrying a leather medical bag, was already waiting in the massive living area. "Boss?" the doctor said, rushing forward. Griffin said it was a torso wound. "Through and through," Matteo said, finally allowing his exhaustion to show as he sank into a plush leather sofa. But she already handled it. He pointed a bloody finger toward Chloe. The doctor raised an eyebrow, looking at the exhausted, overweight woman clutching a sleeping child. "Her? She did a better job than you usually do, Doc," Matteo growled. "Check the stitches, then show her to the East Wing. Give her whatever she needs for the boy. I'm staying right here until I know you're not going to die on my watch," Chloe stated stubbornly, refusing to move. "I didn't risk my son's life just to let your quack doctor give you an infection." Matteo's eyes darkened, locking onto hers. The sheer audacity of this woman was intoxicating. In a world full of plastic, desperate women throwing themselves at his wealth and power, Chloe stood there in her worn-out fleece, thick, soft, and unapologetically fierce. "Check the stitches, Doc," Matteo commanded, never breaking eye contact with Chloe. The doctor carefully snipped away the makeshift bandages Chloe had applied. He inspected the wound under the bright lights of the living room. "The suturing is flawless," the doctor admitted, clearly astonished. "Tight, clean, and the bleeding is completely arrested. I'll administer a proper IV of antibiotics and some fluids." "But she saved your life, boss." Chloe let out a long, shaky breath, her broad shoulders finally dropping a fraction of an inch. "See, I told you I fix things." "Griffin," Matteo called out. The giant driver stepped into the room immediately. "Take Chloe and Finn to the master suite. It's the most secure room in the house." "Wait, the master suite," Chloe interrupted, shifting Finn's weight on her wide hip. "That's your room. We just need a guest bed." "You are under my protection now, Chloe," Matteo said softly, the dangerous edge in his voice entirely replaced by a possessive, protective warmth that sent a strange shiver down her spine. "You get the best I have to offer. Go sleep. Tomorrow, we hunt the men who forced you out of your home." Chloe didn't argue. She was simply too tired. She followed Griffin down the sprawling hallway, stepping into a bedroom that was larger than her entire duplex. As she laid Finn down on the massive cloud-like mattress and pulled the heavy silk duvet over his small body, she caught a glimpse of herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked entirely out of place. Her heavy curves, her messy hair, her exhausted face. She didn't belong in a billionaire mafia boss's mansion. Yet, as she remembered the way Matteo had looked at her, not with disgust or pity, but with raw, unhidden awe, she realized her life in the shadows was over. The monster had claimed her, and God help her. A dark, terrifying part of her heart was starting to claim him back. Sunlight flooded the master suite of the New Hampshire fortress, bouncing off the polished mahogany furniture and blinding Chloe as she slowly opened her eyes. She was buried under a mountain of imported Egyptian cotton and a thick goose down duvet. For a brief, blissful second, she forgot about the gunfire, the blood, and the mafia boss recovering downstairs. Then she felt the sheer size of the bed, and reality crashed back over her. She sat up abruptly, her soft, heavy curves shifting under the silk nightgown she had found folded on the dresser the night before. Finn was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed, entirely absorbed in a massive box of expensive Lego sets someone must have placed there while they slept. He didn't look traumatized. He looked like a kid on Christmas morning. "Look, Mummy." Finn beamed, holding up a half-constructed spaceship. "Mister," Griffin said, "I could build anything I want." Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She swung her thick legs over the edge of the mattress, her bare feet sinking into the plush Persian rug. "That's beautiful, sweetie. You stay here and finish that. Mommy needs to go check on our patient." She threw on her faded fleece sweater over the silk gown, acutely aware of how ridiculous she looked in this palace of wealth. As she walked down the sprawling hallway, the sheer scale of Matteo's operation became terrifyingly clear. Heavily armed men in tactical gear, carrying matte black Sig Sauer rifles, patrolled the perimeter outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. State-of-the-art surveillance feeds glowed from a glass-walled command center. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a heavily fortified war room. When she reached the main living area, Matteo was sitting at a massive glass dining table, surrounded by maps, a sleek laptop, and a stack of burner phones. He had traded his bloody suit for a pair of dark sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt that barely concealed the fresh bandages wrapped tightly around his midsection. His broad shoulders were tense as he listened to Griffin, who stood beside him, looking grim. "We have a massive problem, boss," Griffin was saying, his deep voice rumbling. "Our contacts at Boston Medical Center confirmed the Donovans are pulling every favor they have. But it gets worse. The rat inside our crew gave them the security footage from the alleyway where you were hit, and Officer Riley. He ran her plates." Griffin slid a photograph across the glass table. Chloe felt her stomach drop into her heavy thighs. It was a grainy DMV photo of her face, with a terrifyingly large number printed underneath. $2 million. Matteo read aloud, his voice dropping an octave, radiating cold, absolute fury. Connor Donovan put a $2 million bounty on the head of a civilian single mother. I told you I was a dead woman if I stayed. Chloe interrupted, stepping fully into the room. Both men turned. Mateo's icy blue eyes instantly softened as they swept over her. He took in her messy brown hair, the faded oversized sweater, and the soft wide hips that swayed slightly as she walked closer. In a room full of hardened killers and cold steel, she was a fierce, grounded reality that anchored him. You are not dead, Mateo stated firmly, pushing the photograph aside. Nobody gets within 50 miles of this compound without my permission. Griffin, who is the leak? We narrowed it down, Griffin replied, giving Chloe a curt nod of respect. It has to be Harrison. He was the only lieutenant who knew your exact route to the docks last night. He bypassed the security protocols on his encrypted phone right before the ambush. Harrison. Mateo spat the name like poison. He leaned back, wincing slightly, as the movement tugged at his stitches. He has been with my family for 10 years. The Donovans must have promised him half my territory. What are you going to do? Chloe asked, crossing her plump arms over her chest to hide her trembling hands. We are going to rip Harrison's life apart, Mateo said calmly, though his eyes burned with a lethal promise. But first, I am going to ensure you and Finn are untouchable. Mateo slowly stood up, brushing off Griffin's attempt to assist him. He walked around the table, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of Chloe. The height difference forced her to tilt her head back to look into his intense gaze. I have transferred a considerable amount of money into an offshore account in your name, Mateo said quietly. His voice meant only for her. If anything happens to me, you take Finn, you take Griffin, and you disappear. You will never have to work a double shift at that clinic again. You will never have to worry about the heat turning off. Chloe's jaw dropped. I don't want your blood money, Mateo. I just want my son to be safe. It's not blood money, Mateo insisted, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. His calloused thumb brushed against her soft skin, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine. It's a safety net. You saved my life, Chloe. You looked Riley in the eye and protected a monster. Let the monster protect you back. Before she could process the heavy, intoxicating weight of his words, a loud, piercing alarm shattered the quiet of the penthouse. Red strobe lights began flashing in the command center. Perimeter breach. One of the guards yelled from the glass room, his fingers flying across the keyboards. Sensors tripped in the north woods. 3 armored SUVs approaching the outer gate. It's a heavily armed assault team. Griffin racked the slide of his Glock, his face turning to stone. Harrison gave them the coordinates. They bypassed the outer jammers. Mateo didn't flinch. He looked down at Chloe, his expression shifting from a gentle protector to the ruthless king of the Boston underworld. Get to the master suite. Lock the reinforced door. Do not come out until I come for you. Gunfire erupted in the distance, a muffled, terrifying pop, pop, pop that echoed off the snow-covered mountains. Chloe didn't freeze. Her maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. She spun around, her heavy frame moving with surprising speed and agility, sprinting down the hallway toward the master suite. "Finn!" she screamed as she burst through the heavy mahogany door. Her son jumped up, dropping the Lego pieces, his eyes wide with fear. Chloe scooped his 50-pound body into her arms without a second thought, her thick biceps straining as she carried him into the massive walk-in closet at the back of the suite. She pushed him behind a row of Matteo's expensive custom suits, wrapping her large, soft body entirely around him to form a human shield. "Mummy, what's that loud noise?" Finn whimpered, burying his face into her fleece sweater. "It's just the wind, baby," Chloe lied, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to sound calm. "Just a big storm. We're going to play hide-and-seek in here for a little bit, okay? Just stay super quiet." Outside the bedroom, the compound had turned into a war zone. The Donovans had sent their elite hit squad, heavily armed mercenaries, who moved with terrifying precision. But they had vastly underestimated Matteo Romano's paranoid level of preparation. Down in the main living area, Matteo ignored the burning agony in his side. He gripped a heavy assault rifle, standing shoulder to shoulder with Griffin behind an overturned marble table, as the large floor-to-ceiling windows shattered under a hail of bullets. The frigid New Hampshire wind howled through the broken glass, carrying the scent of cordite and blood. They brought breaching charges. Griffin yelled over the deafening roar of automatic fire. "They're trying to blow the main elevator doors." "Let them try." Matteo roared back, firing a calculated deadly burst into the tree line, dropping 2 mercenaries instantly. "Harrison thinks he can take my throne by attacking my home? He's a fool. Activate the interior defense grid." Griffin smashed his fist onto a red panel hidden beneath the kitchen counter. Heavy, bulletproof steel shutters slammed down over the broken windows, plunging the room into near darkness, illuminated only by the red emergency lights. The elevator doors beeped loudly before a localized EMP charge fried the electronics in the shaft, trapping the ascending hit squad between floors. For 20 agonizing minutes, the compound shook with explosions, gunfire, and the screams of dying men. Chloe sat trembling in the dark closet, her plump hands clamped tightly over Finn's ears, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. She imagined the corrupt cops, the rival gang members, the sheer violence tearing through the walls. She imagined Matteo bleeding out again, unable to fight. Suddenly, the gunfire stopped. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the fortress. Chloe held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the door. Heavy footsteps approached the master suite. The reinforced door beeped and clicked open. Chloe tightened her grip on Finn, bracing herself. The closet door swung open. Matteo stood there. He was covered in drywall dust, his black shirt torn, and a fresh cut bleeding above his eyebrow. But he was alive. His icy blue eyes scanned the dark closet, softening the moment they locked onto Chloe. He dropped his rifle to the floor and fell to his knees, ignoring his injuries, wrapping his massive, muscular arms around Chloe and Finn. He pulled her heavy, soft body against his chest, burying his face in her messy hair. "It's over," Matteo whispered, his breath hot against her neck. "They're dead. Griffin is securing the perimeter. Harrison has been captured alive by my men in the city. You are safe." Chloe let out a choked sob, the adrenaline finally crashing out of her system. She buried her face in his shoulder, her tears soaking his shirt. Finn peeked out from her arms, looking at Matteo. "Did you beat the dragon giant?" Matteo pulled back slightly, a genuine warm smile breaking through his bruised face. "I beat the dragon, little man. Nobody is ever going to hurt you or your mum again." Later that evening, after Finn had been put back to bed, and the cleanup crew had arrived to erase all evidence of the siege, Chloe found Matteo standing on a secluded, heavily guarded balcony overlooking the snowy valley. The cold wind bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside, her thick curves wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. "You should be resting," Chloe said softly, standing next to him. Matteo turned, his intense gaze locking onto her. "I have never met anyone like you, Chloe. The women in my world, they shatter at the first sign of danger. But you protect, you fight." Chloe looked down, suddenly feeling incredibly self-conscious. She pulled the blanket tighter around her wide hips. "I'm just a fat, tired mom, Matteo. I don't belong in this world. I don't fit in with the supermodels and the money." Matteo's jaw tightened. He stepped into her space, his large hands reaching out to grab her waist, pulling her heavy, soft frame flush against his hard, muscular body. "Don't you ever insult yourself in front of me," he commanded gently, his voice vibrating with raw passion. "I don't want plastic. I don't want fragile. I want a queen who can look the devil in the eye and tell him to get off her porch." He reached up, cupping her plump cheek, his thumb wiping away a stray tear. "You are beautiful, every inch of you, and you belong by my side." Before Chloe could protest, Matteo leaned down and captured her lips. The kiss was fierce, demanding, and entirely consuming. It wasn't the tentative kiss of a cautious romance. It was a territorial claim, a promise of absolute devotion from a man who destroyed everything he touched except her. For the first time in her life, Chloe didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful. She felt worshipped, and as she wrapped her thick arms around the ruthless mafia boss, pulling him closer, she knew there was no going back to her quiet life in South Boston. Morning broke over the New Hampshire mountains, painting the blood-stained snow outside the compound in a deceptive, glittering blanket of white. Deep within the subterranean levels of the fortress, however, the cold reality of Matteo Romano's world was entirely on display. Chloe stood in front of the heavy steel door of the soundproof bunker, her thick, soft curves wrapped in a luxurious cashmere sweater Matteo had laid out for her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to step back. Griffin, standing guard by the biometric scanner, looked down at her with a mixture of hesitation and profound respect. "Boss said you shouldn't be down here, Chloe," Griffin rumbled, his massive frame blocking the entrance. "It isn't a place for a civilian. Harrison is singing, and it's getting ugly. I stopped being a civilian the second I dug a bullet out of your boss's chest," Chloe replied, her voice remarkably steady. She crossed her plump arms, planting her feet firmly. "Open the door, Griffin." Griffin sighed, pressing his thumb to the scanner. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing a stark, brightly lit room. Matteo sat backward on a metal folding chair, his broad shoulders tense beneath a fresh black shirt. Tied to a chair opposite him was Harrison, his former lieutenant. Harrison's face was bruised and swollen, his expensive suit ruined. As Chloe's heavy footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, Both men turned. Mateo's icy blue eyes widened in surprise, an instinctual flash of protective anger crossing his features, but he didn't raise his voice. Harrison, however, let out a wet, coughing laugh, spitting blood onto the floor. "This is her?" Harrison sneered, his eyes raking over Chloe's wide hips and round belly with blatant disgust. "You sold out the entire Romano syndicate, handed our shipping routes to the Donovans, and risked all our lives for a fat vet tech from the slums? I thought you were losing your edge, Mateo. But you're just pathetic." The air in the room instantly turned to pure ice. Mateo stood up so fast, his chair clattered to the floor. His hand moved in a blur, drawing a custom 1911 pistol from his waistband and pressing the barrel directly between Harrison's eyes. The lethal, merciless king of Boston had returned, and his finger was trembling on the trigger. "So just say one more word about my queen," Mateo whispered, his voice vibrating with a demonic fury. "Breathe in her direction, and I will scatter your brains across this concrete." "Mateo, wait." Chloe stepped forward, her hand reaching out to wrap around his rigid, muscular arm. She didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. Instead, she stepped directly into Harrison's line of sight, her sheer size and undeniable presence commanding the room. She looked down at the traitor, a calm, maternal disappointment in her eyes that was somehow more intimidating than Mateo's weapon. "You think my weight makes me weak, Harrison? I haul 200-pound mastiffs for a living. I stretch a paycheck to keep a child alive in a city that eats people whole. You wore fancy suits and played tough guy while stabbing your own family in the back. You aren't a man. You're just a coward who couldn't handle loyalty." Harrison's sneer faltered, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his bruised face as he realized Chloe wasn't a fragile liability. She was Mateo's absolute anchor. "Tell him the rest, Harrison," Mateo commanded, lowering the gun just an inch, his eyes never leaving the traitor. "Before I let her perform unanesthetized surgery on you." Harrison swallowed hard. It wasn't just Connor Donovan. Connor doesn't have the capital to fund a mercenary siege. It's District Attorney Bradley Whitman. Whitman wants the seaport development contract for his private donors. He paid the Donovans to take you out, and he paid me to give them your schedule. If you kill me, Whitman brings the entire federal government down on this compound. Mateo slowly lowered the gun. A dark, calculating smirk spreading across his handsome face. "Whitman is corrupt. I have the ledger from his offshore accounts. Griffin, send the files to the major news outlets. Let the feds tear Whitman apart. As for Connor Donovan, his organization died on my lawn last night." Mateo turned away from Harrison, dismissing the broken man completely. He hoisted his weapon and wrapped his large arm around Chloe's wide waist, pulling her soft, heavy body flush against his side. "Get him out of my sight," Mateo ordered Griffin. "Hand him over to the remaining Donovans. Let them see what happens to men who fail." Upstairs, the heavy tension of the bunker vanished the moment they stepped back into the master suite. Finn was sitting on the plush rug, happily watching a cartoon on the massive flat-screen television. Chloe let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. Her knees went weak, but Mateo caught her, sweeping her easily into his powerful arms despite her weight, and carried her to the edge of the oversized bed. He knelt before her on the plush carpet, his hands gently resting on her thick thighs. He looked up at her, his icy eyes completely melted into pools of absolute devotion. "The war is over," Matteo said softly. "Whitman is finished, and the Donovans are broken. But my life will always have shadows, Chloe. I will never force you to stay in the dark. I have a private jet fueled and waiting. I can send you and Finn anywhere in the world with enough money to live like royalty for the rest of your lives." Chloe looked down at the Ruthless Mafia boss kneeling at her feet. She reached out, her plump fingers threading through his dark hair, pulling him closer until their foreheads rested against each other. "You told me I belong by your side," Chloe whispered, a fierce, loving smile gracing her lips. "I don't run, Matteo. Not from corrupt cops, not from mercenaries, and definitely not from you. I love you. We are staying." Matteo let out a ragged breath, wrapping his arms around her wide hips and burying his face in her soft stomach, holding her as if she were the only real thing in his world. In the span of 48 hours, the brutal crime lord had found his humanity, and the invisible, struggling single mother had found her kingdom. Together, they were entirely unbreakable. What an incredibly thrilling journey for Chloe and Matteo. From a terrifying, bloody encounter in a freezing South Boston duplex to reigning supreme over a powerful empire, their love story proves that true strength comes in all shapes and sizes, and loyalty is the ultimate weapon. If you loved watching this fierce, curvy, single mom tame the most dangerous mafia boss in the city, please hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, heart-pounding stories. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite plot twist.